Great. This is Flipping the Tables. I'm Colleen Shaddix. Today we're delighted to be joined by Marianne Comfort, who is Justice Director for the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I know a lot of your work has focused on environmentalism. Tell me how caring for the environment is actually part of our faith.
Sure. Well, I think fundamentally, for many faiths, including our Catholic faith, caring for creation is a mandate. And we can see that in on all kinds of texts in our scriptures. And I think caring for people who are harmed by the desecration of our environment is also. So I really resonate with Pope Francis' call to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. I think that really sums up what we're about in this space.
I, I think talk a little bit about extractive industries, and I think that will get us to that connection.
Absolutely. So the Sisters of Mercy a number of years ago made a commitment to education and advocacy on extractive industries because of our sisters calling us to that from Latin America.
Hmm.
They were telling us about mining, oil and gas drilling, that was really devastating their communities, and they really wanted us to be in solidarity with them. So the Sisters of Mercy and myself, as part of that, really kind of have embarked on this journey of hearing the stories of, first of all, from our sisters in Latin America and in the Philippines. And then we started opening our eyes to how that is actually playing in the United States. That when we're talking about so-called solutions to climate change, people are talking about the mining that we need to do to get those minerals. And so really starting to see the connections between addressing climate change and the need to do so without wreaking damage on our environment and communities who live near where those minerals are, which in the United States, most of those minerals are within a close proximity to our native communities. And so really having to look holistically at this big
Hmm.
issue of climate change and not perpetuating the harms of the fossil fuel era in a different way by addressing climate change and pushing harms on to people because we need these particular metals for our solar panels and our EVs and so forth.
There is so much pressure to buy these things. I every Earth Day, I honor the earth by not buying any of the green products that are marketed to me. Um, how do we balance the desire to do better, to have a lower emissions car, to add solar to our household heating and cooling, with some kind of care to make sure that we're not ruining some other community to do that good thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a number of things. One I would say is really do your research because the impacts of, say, solar panels or an EV car can kind of vary depending where you are. I mean, you might live in a place that actually has a pretty good mix of so-called clean energy, say
Hmm.
water, and you might live in another place where it's all coal. And so the benefit of having solar or EV is going to be more if you're in in a place where it's coal generated power, say so replacing it by solar is going to be a better thing. I think the other thing is, again, under research, is really doing research and not just going with the common wisdom that electric vehicles, for instance, are the best way to go. Again, it could be that hybrids actually could be when you look at all the heavier, that EV cars are much heavier, so they're going to have more wear and tear. It could, and also taking up into account all the minerals that go in there. The other thing I would say is I think the Jesuits' practice of an examen can really be useful in here. Like, how do we ask ourselves questions for deep discernment about our choices? About, do we really need to replace our cell phone every year, even every 2 years when a new model comes in? If my phone that perfectly adequate, maybe I don't need to buy one for several years, and then I'm not contributing to producing those new things. So I think that personal discernment is really important. And then I would say, I think, and inevitably we're living in the society we're living in, and so we're going to be doing some damage because we can't avoid it. But how do we do advocacy to minimize that? So a lot of our environmental organization partners are really promoting this idea of a circular economy. Lithium, copper, they're not burned up like coal and oil and gas. We can reuse them. So can we develop a system and advocate for a system where we reuse the batteries in EVs? They don't have to be junked and have new ones. Can we even reuse the minerals, somehow take them out of that? Can we be finding some of those minerals in areas that have already been devastated by coal, like through the waste of other extractive processes? So I think it's really taking a deeper look and not just going with a common wisdom that we should do this, that, or the other thing, but really ask a lot of questions of ourselves about how we're contributing and how we might make different choices. And then asking something of our society and of our government to make it easier to make better choices.
I confess that I very often don't know how my actions and my consumption affect other people. Um, Learned recently that so many of the fast fashion products we buy are full of plastic and get disposed of pretty quickly, and decided to only buy secondhand clothes after that. So, okay, that's one thing I'm doing better, but it seems like there are so many products coming at us from such complicated supply chains. How do you educate yourself?
Hmm. I mean, I think really it comes down to just reducing, not buying as much.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the opportunity to read a lot of materials coming out from the bishops of the global south, um, uh, groups, indigenous groups, other groups, and this whole idea of buen vivir coming out of South America, good living, and that doesn't depend on how much we buy, but of who we are and our relationships. So for me, the first line thing is just being very discerning on what do I need and what am I going to buy,
Mm-hmm.
and just reducing how much I'm buying. And then I think the other thing is when I do need to buy something, can I, do enough research and not feel the urgency, oh, I have to buy this right now. Take some time, take a deep breath, do some research about what would be the best alternative in an imperfect world where you're not going to be able to make the perfect decision, but you can make one that you can feel okay about.
That's very countercultural.
It is. And I think that's exactly what Pope Francis was inviting us into. Laudato Si is just full of talking about we're not going to get out of this with technological fixes. It's kind of like the saying, you're not going to get out of a mess in the same thing that put you in the mess.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pope Francis was totally inviting us into the counterculture of rethinking consumerism, rejecting the need that what society's pressuring us to be buying, and that the ultimate solutions are spiritual, that we come to understand ourselves and our relationship with other people and the non-human world, and that we then make our choices grounded in that and not grounded in the latest technology that might be the fix that would get us out of this mess, to only find out that that comes with its own problems that we then need to address.
It's interesting. You work for religious sisters with religious sisters, and that's always been the tradition for people in consecrated life to have less, to not let stuff get in the way of your relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, and I do think, I was in formation for a while myself, with a congregation of women religious, and that vow, there's three vows, and one of them is poverty. And the modern interpretation of that is to live simply. And that so resonates with me.
Mhm.
That, I mean, I think poverty has this very negative connotation because it can feel like it's imposed on you. A lot of people have poverty imposed on you, but living simply can be a choice, and it can be very, make this whole idea of discernment and discerning. And then there's the whole community dynamic. Maybe I don't need everything. Maybe I can ask my neighbor for something
Right.
I need. I mean, my husband and I don't own a car by choice. And because we live in Washington, D.C. area, we can get by without it. And it's, created some really nice interdependence with friends of like when we want to go hiking, we reach out to friends, and then we have a
Mhm.
broader circle of people that we're kind of engaging with, that if we had our own car, can just go do our thing. If, we would miss some of those experiences. So I think it is looking at how making some of these choices can be enriching. I think some people think that living simply or deciding not to buy things is really a sacrifice, or really negative. And that's why, again, that Blaine Vivier is such a positive image, that
Mm,
we can live so fully and richly by looking at relationships and how we're living interdependently, giving and taking with other people, rather than thinking we have to have everything in our own little box of a life, that there's sharing and
exactly.
there's economies of sharing and bartering and engaging, that can be so rich and focused on relationships rather than what I can accumulate just for myself or for my household.
My kids had a DIY wedding, and I collected used champagne glasses from all over. And it's great. Now, whenever anybody in town has a party, I get invited because they want my champagne glasses.
Yeah, and just think of the beauty of that is the relationships that people, and you're also modeling it. Like everybody who
Mhm.
went to that wedding was like, wow, this is a really fun and beautiful wedding, and I didn't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And it could still be a great celebration, and still having the celebrating all the relationships that the couple has had over the years.
Yeah,
And you don't need all the trappings to make it memorable.
exactly. You touched on asking our government to take steps that would make living simply, living cleanly easier. Can you talk about some of the things that you're working on?
Sure. So I named the circular economy, and that certainly is one. Could we have that built in more, yeah, rather than things going to the dump, finding ways of reusing them. So that would be one. I think on the local level, there's lots of opportunities. Like we used to live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and Tacoma Park has curbside composting. Total shift, right? If you're a city and you're giving everybody a compost bucket and you're making it easy, everybody can compost. They don't have to
Yeah.
dig the compost in their backyard. They don't have to worry about the rats coming, all the excuses people have. You're making it easier. Transportation, if you make public transportation easier, then people are going to use it. People are going to use their cars less, and we're going to have fewer carbon emissions. So I think that from the local all the way up to the federal, there's lots of things that governments can do to make it easier for people to live more sustainably, make choices that are make having a lighter impact on Earth and on other people.
How does one persuade them to do those things when the fossil fuel industry, for example, has lots of lobbyists and makes campaign contributions? What's the power behind greenness?
I think it is very difficult, and I am so heartened by all the communities that are pushing back against data centers,
Hmm.
which is a big part of this infrastructure of extractivism. Like we need more minerals to power the data centers, and it's so heartening to see, like, New York has a fairly new moratorium. I was just reading about another state that I think that, yeah, Illinois. A few years ago, the governor was like all excited about data centers and investments, and now he's like, oh, maybe we got to put a pause on that. Counties are putting moratoriums on data centers, and it was people rose up. It was
Hmm.
angry people who said, our electricity rates are going up, it's noisy, all the things, as people are understanding the impacts. So I find that very heartening. And maybe it's better at the local level where the officials really are accountable. They're in a room and people are screaming at them, which you don't get the same dynamic with the federal government. So maybe that's where we start, is really showing the power of people in the local level, county level, state level. And then from there, maybe that rises up to higher levels of government.
You talked about how extractive industries are usually doing their mining, their negative practices in the global south, in Native American reservations here in the US. But I am thinking that when we talk about things like data centers that can potentially cut off the supply of water to a community, we know who's going to suffer the most from that.
Absolutely. Like, we have a sister and a Franciscan sister who live in community in New Mexico, and they're doing active advocacy against the data center. I mean, think about that. New Mexico is mostly a desert, and they want
Mhm.
to put huge data centers that are going to be using all the water. How is that even sane? And so I think it's making those connections and pointing out these contradictions is so important. The Catholic Climate Covenant had a webinar a few months ago about these issues of data centers and AI, and there was the example of Memphis where these really dirty generators are being used near a very impoverished community to power the data centers, and so they're being exposed to all this pollution. So we talk about environmental justice, and these are the kind of examples about seeing where these are happening, and where who's going to be impacted and who doesn't have as maybe as much as a voice as others. And so how do we support, the people are doing the advocacy, and how do we join their movements and speak alongside them, against some of these practices that are just so wrong. I mean, just think about the Oak Flat, which has been going on for over a decade, of the Apache, trying to oppose this huge open pit copper mine, and it just got the approval. And people have been in solidarity with them for all this time of like trying to speak out. And sometimes you lose some of these fights, and at the same time, you're still in solidarity and can know that you were in solidarity and we're speaking out, and alongside people who are most impacted. And then
Does that
sometimes you
help?
win.
Does that help with the next battle? Because we're not really talking about um, terribly nuanced issues, right? We're talking about communities that have very little getting hurt through actions that we know aren't sustainable. It's just wrong. It shouldn't be hard to stop it, right? But it is.
It is because, as you said, you're going against some very powerful interests and economic interests. And we're seeing that especially now, where there seems to be appetite both in Congress and in this administration to just mine everywhere. And so, reducing the time limits for public comment, whittling away at regulations to have these kind of projects go through quicker. It's all very challenging and very demoralizing. And we are people of faith. And so I keep saying we have to do the work, we have to do the advocacy, we have to stand in solidarity with communities that are facing these threats. As Mother Teresa said, right? We're called to be faithful, not necessarily successful.
Hmm.
And so we keeping working at it. And then every once in a while, you see victory, like in Panama a couple years ago, the people rose up to end a contract of a big copper mine, and the Supreme Court of Panama ended up saying, the people are right. We should not renew this contract. So, you can get, Ecuador, have put in protections of a really important ecosystem and national park. So, you can see these bright spots around the world and say, if they could do it, we got to keep the fight, because you never know where those, victories are going to happen elsewhere.
can we be organizing in our families, our schools, our parishes to support this work?
Yeah, I think it starts with, I think, people really understanding that this is a call from our faith, that we're not all chapters of the Sierra Club or what have you, that this is something that our church leaders are calling us to, whether it's, Pope Francis and Laudato Si, the bishops in Latin America, Asia, and Africa speaking so strongly to this. I think it's for people understanding that this is a core part of our faith. And then from there, just kind of looking around, starting locally, just start locally. Look, where is a community that maybe is being harmed by some of the pollution of an extractive industry? Maybe you don't have mining, in your community, but you might have the power plant that's, taking that coal and processing it and spewing it into a community that's nearby. What are the very local grassroots groups that are engaging in some of these concerns and are showing up at the town hall or at the county council meetings? How do you, join in solidarity with these communities? I and been working in solidarity with a Mercy associate in Cicero, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and they're facing all kinds of environmental injustices and trying to figure out, how do we get other churches and other people of faith in that area to join the community there and speaking out about all the sewage that's going in their basements when there's flooding or, a polluting plant that's causing all kinds of damage. So yeah, it's really trying to see very locally who do we connect with to have more allies and partners with our sisters and brothers who are experiencing the worst impacts.
That's great advice. Thank you, Marianne. And I
Because
hope
I
you
don't
come
think we
back
have to
again.
create the work. We all we have to do is see what's happening and then find the people that are already doing the work and add more momentum and energy to their efforts.
Amen. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. This has been a really stimulating conversation. I'm feeling all energized to keep doing the work after this conversation. So thank you for that.
Me too. Great. Thank you.